The Barry Bennell scandal. In late 2016, British football confronted its most harrowing crisis when former professional players began to disclose a horrific secret that had been suppressed for decades. The scandal centred on Barry Bennell, a youth coach associated with Crewe Alexandra and Manchester City, who was exposed as a prolific serial predator. For years, Bennell had exploited his position of authority and his reputation as a kingmaker to groom and sexually abuse hundreds of young aspiring footballers, manipulating their dreams of stardom to enforce their silence. The catalyst for exposure arrived when former player Andy Woodward bravely waived his anonymity to share his testimony, prompting hundreds of other survivors to come forward. The most damning indictment was not merely the crimes of one individual, but the revelation of a systemic failure. Rumours regarding Bennell's conduct had circulated within football circles for years, yet clubs repeatedly failed to investigate or intervene. The scandal exposed a culture where protecting the reputation of the sport was prioritised over the safety of children, allowing predators to operate unchecked. The aftermath precipitated one of the largest police investigations in UK history, Operation Hydrant. In 2018, Bennell was sentenced to 31 years in prison, where he effectively spent the remainder of his life. However, the legal ramifications extended far beyond him. The scandal triggered an independent review by Clive Sheldon QC, which concluded that the Football Association had presided over significant institutional failings during that era. The legacy is an indelible stain on the sport, but also the catalyst for a fundamental overhaul of safeguarding policies, ensuring that the welfare of young players is finally placed above the interests of the clubs. Mexico. In 1988, the Mexican Football Federation was determined to secure international success, desperate to qualify for both the upcoming Seoul Olympics and the World Youth Championship. However, in their pursuit of glory, they committed one of the most brazen acts of administrative fraud in football history. The scandal centred on the under-20 national team, which had successfully qualified for the World Cup on the pitch. But the victory was a mirage. The Federation had knowingly fielded 4 players who were significantly older than the age limit permitted. The fraud was uncovered not by a rival team, but by Mexican journalist Antonio Moreno. While reviewing a yearbook published by the Federation itself, Moreno noticed a glaring discrepancy. The ages listed in the official book for 4 players, including captain Aurelio Rivera, did not match the birth dates submitted to the Confederation of America for the tournament. The incriminating proof was the Federation's own clumsy paperwork, which irrefutably demonstrated that Rivera was actually 24 years old, competing against teenagers. The fallout was catastrophic, known in Mexico as the Cachirules scandal. Expecting a slap on the wrist, Mexico was instead hit with the death penalty of international sports. FIFA banned all Mexican national teams from international competition for 2 years. The punishment was total. A talented generation was barred from the 1988 Olympics and, most devastatingly, expelled from the 1990 FIFA World Cup in Italy. It remains a national trauma, a stark lesson that the price of cheating at the youth level can cost a country its place on the biggest stage of all. La Masia ban. In 2014, FC Barcelona's La Masia Academy was revered as the gold standard of football development, having produced legends like Lionel Messi, Xavi, and Andres Iniesta. However, the club's aggressive global recruitment strategy came into direct conflict with international law when FIFA imposed a landmark sanction that sent shockwaves through the sport. The governing body accused Barcelona of systematically violating Article 19, a regulation designed to prevent the exploitation and trafficking of minors by prohibiting the signing of international players under the age of 18, unless strict criteria were met. The investigation revealed a clear pattern of misconduct. FIFA identified breaches in 10 specific cases, where the club had recruited young teenagers from countries including South Korea, most notably the highly rated Lee Seung-woo, and Cameroon. The core violation centred on the residency status of the families. The rules state parents must move to the country for non-football reasons, but Barcelona had essentially imported the children alone or orchestrated the parents' relocation purely for sporting purposes, effectively bypassing child welfare safeguards to stockpile talent. The punishment was severe and far-reaching. Barcelona was handed a 14-month transfer ban, preventing them from registering new players for 2 windows along with a significant fine. However, the human cost was far higher. The young prospects involved were banned from playing competitive matches for the club until they turned 18. Many were forced to leave the academy and return home, a hiatus that effectively stalled their development and derailed promising careers, serving as a harsh warning to elite clubs regarding the ethics of youth recruitment. Gael Kakuta. In 2007, Chelsea was engaged in an aggressive recruitment drive aimed at stockpiling the premier young talent in Europe. Their search led them to the French club Lens and a teenage prodigy named Gael Kakuta, a winger so gifted he was widely projected to be the next major superstar of his generation. Chelsea secured his signature, bringing him to London to join their academy, but the acquisition immediately triggered a ferocious legal battle that exposed the opaque, unregulated underbelly of youth transfers. The controversy centred on the methodology of his recruitment. Lens filed a formal complaint with FIFA, accusing Chelsea of tapping up the player, illegally inducing him to breach his valid contract with the French club without their permission. The investigation hinged on allegations of secret financial inducements. It was claimed that Chelsea had covertly agreed to underwrite any fines levied against the player and offered significant off-the-books incentives to his family to force the transfer through, effectively bypassing standard negotiation protocols. The initial punishment was seismic. FIFA handed Chelsea a transfer ban, preventing them from signing players for 2 windows, and suspended Kakuta from playing for 4 months. While the ban was ultimately overturned by the Court of Arbitration for Sport after the clubs reached a private settlement, the collateral damage was irreversible. The immense pressure and global scrutiny placed on the teenagers' shoulders proved overwhelming. Kakuta, the boy who sparked a diplomatic incident, struggled to establish himself at Stamford Bridge, eventually becoming a journeyman rather than a legend, a cautionary tale of how a high-stakes transfer war can destroy the very asset clubs are fighting to possess. Neymar scandal. In the summer of 2013, FC Barcelona executed the signing of the decade, securing Brazilian prodigy Neymar Jr. from Santos and beating their arch-rivals Real Madrid to his signature. The club announced a transfer fee of €57.1 million, a figure touted as a bargain for a future Ballon d'Or contender. However, this sum was a mirage designed to mislead tax authorities and investors. The deal was actually constructed upon a complex web of opaque transactions that would eventually dismantle the club's leadership. The scandal was exposed when investigators uncovered the critical deception, a secret, parallel payment structure. Of the officially reported fee, only €17.1 million was transferred to Santos. The remaining €40 million was funneled directly to a company owned by Neymar's parents, N&N Consultoria, disguised as a penalty clause payment. This mechanism appeared to be a calculated manoeuvre to circumvent the third-party investment fund, which held 40% of Neymar's sporting rights. By concealing the majority of the capital inside deals with the family, Barcelona and the player effectively deprived the investment fund of their rightful share of the profit. The consequences were severe, reaching the highest echelons of the club's hierarchy. Barcelona was charged with tax fraud for failing to declare the true value of the transfer. The mounting legal pressure compelled club president Sandro Rosell to resign, and he subsequently faced years of legal battles. The club was ultimately forced to pay a voluntary corrective settlement of €13.5 million to the Spanish Treasury to mitigate further prosecution, transforming the bargain transfer into one of the most legally toxic agreements in football history. Liverpool. In 2017, Liverpool FC faced a humiliating disciplinary reckoning that exposed the cutthroat reality of youth recruitment in the Premier League. The Merseyside Giants had targeted a talented 12-year-old prospect from Stoke City's academy, intending to integrate him into their prestigious development system. However, the negotiation process bypassed standard regulations and descended into illicit inducements, triggering a high-profile investigation that deeply embarrassed the club's hierarchy. The violation hinged on a secret financial agreement designed to incentivise the child's parents. Liverpool executives had agreed to cover the boy's private school fees, totalling approximately £49,000 until he reached the age of 16, a luxury Stoke City had not previously provided. Furthermore, The critical infraction involved an all-expenses-paid trip for the player and his family to attend a match at Anfield, constituting a clear breach of the strict rules prohibiting clubs from offering improper benefits to minors to induce a transfer. The sanctions imposed by the Premier League were both severe and reputational. Liverpool received a 2-year ban on signing academy players from other English league clubs and was fined £100,000. Yet, the true victim of this recruitment war was the 12-year-old boy himself. The collapse of the transfer left him in administrative limbo, unable to play competitive football for either club for a significant period, underscoring how young athletes frequently become collateral damage in the tug-of-war between billion-pound institutions. PSG. In late 2018, the Football Leaks investigation detonated a reputational bombshell for Paris Saint-Germain, exposing a systemic violation of French law within one of the world's wealthiest clubs. The leak revealed that for 5 years, between 2013 and 2018, PSG's recruitment department had operated an illegal ethnic profiling system to filter youth prospects. In a nation where collecting racial data is strictly prohibited, scouts were systematically categorising children based on their skin colour and ethnic origin, rather than solely on their potential. The damning evidence was embedded in the recruitment forms themselves, which featured a mandatory drop-down menu compelling scouts to classify players into one of 4 racial categories: Français, white; Maghrébin, North African; Antillais, West Indian; or Afrique Noire, Black African. The discrimination extended beyond mere data collection. Internal notes exposed a disturbing policy where a leading scout explicitly stated the club didn't want to recruit players born in Africa, citing doubts regarding the reliability of birth dates and a clear preference for French-born talent. The fallout was both a public relations disaster and a legal infraction. The French Professional Football League Disciplinary Committee levied a fine of €100,000 against the club. While PSG acknowledged the existence of the forms, the board distanced itself from the practice, characterising it as the rogue initiative of individual department heads rather than institutional policy. The scandal remains a dark chapter in the club's history, highlighting the grim reality that even in the multicultural heart of Paris, young players were reduced to demographic labels before they ever set foot on the pitch. Age fraud. In the high-stakes ecosystem of youth football, success at the U17 level is frequently viewed as a golden gateway to lucrative European contracts. However, for decades, allegations have persisted that certain nations systematically field overage players adults competing against adolescents to secure short-term glory. This open secret was scientifically confronted by the mandatory introduction of MI risk scanning, a medical assessment designed to determine age by analysing the fusion of the radial and ulnar growth plates. The extent of the systemic fraud was laid bare in 2 massive waves of failure. In 2016, Nigeria, a 5-time winner of the U17 World Cup, saw their squad dismantled when 26 players failed the MRI assessment just prior to a crucial qualifier, forcing the coaching staff to reconstruct the team from scratch. The scale of the crisis was reconfirmed in January 2023, when Cameroon's Football Federation, under the leadership of Samuel Eto'o, mandated internal screenings. The outcome was catastrophic. 32 players failed the age verification, compelling the Federation to disqualify virtually their entire youth setup overnight. The fallout from these mass failures validated what skeptics had long suspected, that previous golden generations were likely powered by athletes significantly older than their biological counterparts. While the official consequence in these instances was limited to squad disqualification, the broader legacy is a pervasive erosion of trust in youth records from specific regions. This has led major European clubs to bypass official birth certificates entirely, relying instead on their own private medical data to verify potential signings. Abdelhak Nouri. In July 2017, the future of Dutch football seemingly lay at the feet of Abdelhak Appy Nouri. The 20-year-old midfielder was the crown jewel of the Ajax Academy, a talent so undeniable he was already being spoken of in the same breath as club legends. However, During a pre-season friendly against Werder Bremen in Austria, tragedy struck. Nouri collapsed on the pitch, suffering a cardiac arrest. The match was abandoned, and spectators watched in horror as medical staff swarmed the player. But what appeared to be a standard emergency response was actually a catastrophic failure of protocol. The pivotal finding of the subsequent investigation concerned the timeline of the medical intervention. Analysis revealed that the on-field treatment was critically inadequate. For several vital minutes, the medical staff erroneously focused on clearing Nouri's airways, believing his airway was obstructed rather than assessing his cardiac rhythm. They hesitated to utilise the defibrillator, a delay that proved fatal to his neural function. By the time his heart was restarted, the prolonged oxygen deprivation had caused severe, permanent brain damage. The fallout was a heartbreaking legal and emotional battle. While Ajax initially defended their medical team, the club eventually admitted full liability in 2018. General Manager Edwin van der Sar delivered a tearful press conference, acknowledging that had the defibrillator been deployed sooner, Nouri likely would have survived without such devastating consequences. The Prince of Amsterdam never played again, and now requires around-the-clock care, his career serving as a permanent, tragic reminder of the absolute necessity of rapid emergency cardiac protocols. Quota's scandal. In 2011, French football stood as a global powerhouse, its academies celebrated for producing a golden generation of talent, particularly from the diverse, multi-ethnic suburbs of Paris, known as the banlieues. However, the Federation's internal perspective on this demographic shift was far more cynical. A seismic controversy erupted when the investigative website Mediapart leaked secret recordings from a high-level meeting involving top officials and national team coach Laurent Blanc, revealing a conversation that challenged the very core of French identity. The scandal centred on a clandestine discussion regarding the implementation of a discriminatory quota system within youth academies. The officials were recorded proposing a cap specifically cited as 30% to limit the number of players with dual nationality, a category that predominantly comprised black and Arab athletes. The justification offered in the tapes was framed in technical terms, but carried heavy racial undertones. The officials argued that the current system was producing too many big, athletic, powerful players who might eventually opt to represent African nations, and suggested a strategic pivot towards smaller technical players. The damning revelation lay in the casual nature of the dialogue, which implied that the governing body viewed its own diversity as a logistical liability rather than a sporting asset. The fallout ignited a national firestorm, while a subsequent official inquiry cleared Blanc of discriminatory intent, accepting his defence that he was debating playing styles rather than race. The scandal exposed a deep cultural fracture. It laid bare the uncomfortable reality that within the halls of power there was an active debate about who truly belonged in the French national system, leaving a permanent scar on the relationship between the Federation and the communities that fuel its success. Jeremy Wisten. In the high-stakes ecosystem of elite football, the Manchester City Academy is one of the most coveted destinations on earth, a factory designed to produce world-class superstars. Jeremy Wisten was a promising defender within this system, dreaming of a career in the Premier League. However, the brutal reality of youth development is that it functions as a funnel where thousands enter but less than 1% survive. For Wisten, the dream began to unravel when he suffered a severe knee injury, a physical setback that ultimately led to the club releasing him, expelling him from the only environment he had known since childhood. The tragedy lay in the silence that followed his exit. Stripped of his identity as a Man City player and struggling with the crushing weight of perceived failure, Wisten fell into a deep depression. In October 2020, just days before his 18th birthday, he took his own life. The damning criticism levelled at the club was not regarding a specific act of malice, but the systemic detachment of the process. The inquest revealed that Wisten found it unbearable to watch his peers progress while he was left behind, and his family testified that the club's mental health support effectively ceased the moment he was no longer a contractual asset. The fallout forced a painful reckoning across English football regarding the duty of care. Wisten's death highlighted the disposable nature of academy players, who are frequently treated as commodities to be hoarded and then discarded without adequate aftercare. It ignited a nationwide campaign demanding that clubs assume responsibility for the mental well-being of the 99% of boys they reject, ensuring that the termination of a football contract does not feel like the end of a life. Chapecoense. In 2016, Brazilian club Chapecoense was living a real-life fairy tale that captured the imagination of the football world. A modest team from Santa Catarina, they had rocketed from the 4th division to the continental elite in just 7 years. In late November, they were travelling to Medellin, Colombia, to play the biggest match in their history, the first leg of the Copa Sudamericana final against Atlético Nacional. They were the underdog darlings of South America, standing on the brink of improbable glory. The dream ended in horror on a dark mountainside near Medellin. On November 28th, La Mia Flight 2933 crashed, killing 71 of the 77 people on board, including 19 players, the president, and nearly the entire coaching staff. The tragedy was compounded by the devastating conclusion of the investigation. The crash was entirely preventable. The plane had not suffered a mechanical failure, but had simply run out of fuel. The pilot had recklessly gambled on the aircraft's range to skip a refueling stop, a decision that wiped out a generation of talent in an instant. The aftermath saw one of the most poignant moments in sports history. In a gesture of supreme solidarity, their opponents, Atlético Nacional, petitioned American Football Confederation to award the Copa Sudamericana title to Chapecoense to honour the dead. The trophy was granted, but the club faced the grim reality of the Marshall scenario, rebuilding an entire squad from scratch. Relying on loan players and grief-stricken youth prospects, Chapecoense returned to the pitch, transforming from a Cinderella story into an eternal symbol of resilience and collective mourning. Real Madrid. In 2016, European giants Real Madrid found themselves in the crosshairs of FIFA's strict Article 19 regulations, which prohibit the international transfer of minors to prevent trafficking. The governing body handed the club a significant transfer ban, accusing them of illegally registering underage players. However, the case captured global headlines not due to the severity of the violation, but because of the specific victims FIFA alleged were being trafficked, the 4 sons of the club's own manager and legend, Zinedine Zidane. The core of the controversy lay in a bureaucratic technicality. Although the Zidane family had resided in Madrid for over a decade, where Zinedine had worked as a player, advisor, and subsequently as coach, FIFA's rigid algorithms flagged his sons, Enzo, Luca, Theo, and Elias, as foreign minors who had been imported to Spain illegally for footballing purposes. The situation descended into farce when the club was forced to argue the absurdity that the children of their own manager, who attended local schools and had grown up in the city, were not victims of international smuggling. The initial punishment was severe, a 2-window transfer ban, preventing the club from registering new players. However, unlike rival Barcelona, Real Madrid successfully contested the ruling in the Court of Arbitration for Sport. The court acknowledged the unique context and reduced the sanction to a single transfer window. The case stands as the ultimate example of bureaucratic overreach, where a regulation designed to prevent exploitation was blindly applied to the most prominent footballing family in the city. Bench assault, 2012. In May 2012, Italian football witnessed a shocking breakdown of discipline, originating not from the players, but from the man in charge. Delio Rossi was a respected veteran manager tasked with saving Fiorentina from relegation. During a tense match against Novara, Rossi made the decision to substitute 20-year-old Serbian winger Adem Ljajic after just 32 minutes due to a poor performance. The substitution was intended to shake up the team, but it instead sparked one of the most disgraceful sideline incidents in Serie A history. The flashpoint arrived as Ljajic exited the field. Visibly frustrated and humiliated by the early withdrawal, the young player directed a sarcastic round of applause and a thumbs up toward his coach, allegedly muttering a provocation as he passed. Rossi, known for his intensity, suffered a complete loss of composure. In a moment of blind rage, he lunged into the dugout, seized Ljajic by the collar, and began physically assaulting him, throwing punches as staff and substitutes scrambled to pull the 51-year-old manager off his own player. The consequences were immediate and public. Fiorentina owner Andrea Della Valle acted swiftly, terminating Rossi's contract moments after the final whistle and condemning the violence as unjustifiable. Although Rossi later claimed Ljajic had insulted his family, the spectacle of a veteran coach brawling with his own player in the dugout was broadcast live to millions. The incident effectively derailed Rossi's career at the elite level, standing as a stark warning of how a momentary lapse in discipline can obliterate a decades-long reputation. Bob Higgins. For decades, Bob Higgins was a revered figure in English youth football, a coach at Southampton FC and Peterborough United, who held the keys to a professional career for hundreds of aspiring boys. Known as a maker of men, he operated within the prestigious academy system, where his evaluation could determine whether a child became a Premier League star or was cast aside. However, behind this facade of authority lay a predator who utilised his immense power to operate a factory of abuse. The system Higgins employed was eerily similar to other high-profile grooming cases. He systematically abused boys as young as 12, often disguising his assaults as medical massages or mandatory components of special training camps. He cultivated a terrified silence, creating a culture where victims believed that submitting to his demands was the price of admission for remaining in the academy pipeline. The most damning revelation was the institutional blindness. Rumours of his behaviour circulated for years, but a later inquiry found that senior staff at Southampton failed to act, prioritising the club's reputation and the production of talent over the safety of the children in their care. The road to justice was agonisingly slow. It wasn't until 2019, decades after the crimes began, that Higgins was finally convicted of 46 counts of indecent assault against 24 boys and sentenced to 24 years in prison. The case, along with the Barry Bennell scandal, forced a complete overhaul of safeguarding in British sport, exposing how the hierarchical nature of football academies provided the perfect cover for a predator to operate in plain sight.